My name is Wendy Hanamura, and I am the Director of Partnerships for the Internet Archive. Good morning, everyone out there in the live stream world. I know you're out there because starting about 4:30 a.m., I started to get emails from people saying, is this going to be live streamed? I really want to see this, and asking for the address. Welcome to day 2, the first session here on the front end stage. I am so glad that everyone in the room woke up early enough to hear our first speaker, because she's worth getting up at 4 a.m. to hear, no doubt. When I was thinking, who should we invite to be here, so many people wrote to me and said, Jennifer Granick, Jennifer Granick, Jennifer Granick. And so I started to watch different speeches that Jennifer had given through the years. And I hit on a speech that she gave back at Black Hat in 2015. And in it, she said some of the most profound things that I had heard. Understand that she the world together with the technologists. So we are so lucky to have one of the people most interested in changing the laws for the betterment of the internet, for the betterment of society. She's worked just about every important place you can work, from Stanford on, but the folks at ACLU must have begged her to come over, and she has one of the best titles ever. She is the Surveillance and Cyber Security Council at the ACLU. Please welcome Jennifer Granick and her talk, The End of the Internet as We Knew It and What Happens Next.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for coming. I just want to preface my talk by saying that these comments are my own and not the official opinion of the ACLU. If they were the official opinion of the ACLU, I would probably be there trying to get approval for this. So I would never be able to talk. This conference, by its very nature, is hopeful. People are here because we want to build a web that is more private, more secure, that is censorship resistant, and that is open. And the reason we share this dream is because we want there to be a place where it's minds connecting with minds, information is available, and it's a world where how old you are, what your race is, what your gender is, what your religion is, even what the law is, doesn't really matter that much. And you people who are here in this room, who've come to this conference, are here to rebuild that dream. Because the internet of today is not doing it for us. And I have a cautionary message today for the people who are here. And my message is, let's learn from the mistakes of the past. And what were those mistakes? I think that mistake was that we believed that the technology alone and the sensors and the to closing the web and to narrowing the scope of what the internet can do day by day by day. And so today, we're working towards a centrally controlled commercial surveillance bonanza. How are we going to do differently? In 2015, I gave a keynote speech at Black Hat Conference in Las Vegas. And in that speech, I talked about the ways that modern forces were changing the internet as we knew it and killing the dream of internet freedom. And I identified those forces as centralization, regulation, and globalization. And I pointed to these as just the dangerous thing that was taking this thing that people had celebrated and basically slowly tearing it apart. And at the time, people called the speech sad, people said it was depressing, and people said that it was unconventional. But I think today, as I stand here and you guys are here in 2018, I don't think it's unconventional anymore. I think it's something that's patently obvious, and we all know it. We can see it in front of our very eyes. Our optimism about the early internet and what it could be has been undermined by censorship, by surveillance, by discrimination, and by like consolidated economic power. If we knew our history, we might have anticipated this. As Professor Tim Wu wrote in his book, The Master Switch, history shows a typical progression of information technologies, from somebody's hobby to somebody's industry, from jury-rigged contraption to slick production marvel, from a freely accessible channel to one strictly controlled by a single corporation or cartel, from opened to closed systems. And eventually, this cycle is that entrepreneurs or regulators will smash apart the closed system and the cycle begins anew. So my question for us here today is, will whatever technology you build face this same cyclical fate? Or will we be able to do better? Or should we just be resigned to fighting, losing, building, and fighting again? I think that there is hope to break the cycle, but in order to do that, we need to look to how we got here. What were the pressures that pushed the internet towards this white, too male, too US focused? And so all these pressures have come to bear. And these forces, these demands, these values that come from maybe outside this room, outside this community, have pushed the internet into what it's become. Centralized, regulated, privacy nightmare, closed. So let's go back a little bit to the beginning. For me, the dream of internet freedom started in 1984 when I read Stephen Levy's book, Hackers, Heroes of the Computer Revolution. And in it, Levy tells the story of the old school coders and engineers who believed that information should be free, that people should be empowered to make our own decisions about what we read and what we believe, make our own ethical decisions about what was right and wrong, without elites basically hand-feeding it and telling us what we needed to do. So this idea of empowering individuals was built into the very DNA of the early internet. Decentralization was the goal. Smart endpoints, dumb pipes, and these the structure was meant to basically carry whatever brilliance anyone around the world wanted to say globally. Did free access to information, they mistrusted authority, they wanted to change the world. And in the mentor, the author's hopeful words, the future would be a place where we could exist without skin color, without nationality, without religious bias. Not long after that, in 1990, John Gilmore, Mitch Kapor, and John Perry Barlow founded the Electronic Frontier Foundation, an organization for which I worked for a couple of years, to fight for civil liberties and digital technology. And John Perry, may he rest in peace, wrote what is essentially a poem of love for the internet. And it was, in John Perry's typical way, lyrical. Governments of the industrial world, you weary giants of flesh and steel, I come from cyberspace, the new home of mind. On behalf of the future, I ask you of the past to leave it alone, leave us alone. You are not welcome among us. You have no sovereignty where we gather. No sovereignty. It's worth thinking about. Barlow is expressing in this manifesto a weariness with business as usual, and a hope that the internet would put our reading, our personal associations, and our very thoughts outside of government control. Well, today we know that that early dream that governments would have no sovereignty where we gather online is a fiction. That's not how it ended up today. Today, the physical design and the business models that operate on the internet increasingly control us in ways that facilitate rather than defeat censorship. They are commercialized, making a map of everything we do and changing the balance of power between businesses, governments, and individuals, and not in favor of the individuals, but in favor of the businesses and governments. And this isn't what we worked for. This isn't why I represented computer hackers. This isn't why EFF litigated cases to make encryption code free. This isn't why people built HTTPS or HTML or any of the protocols on which the internet runs. We did it because we had this dream, and the dream is dying or dead. So why is this? Well, first of all, user demand. And centralization has been driven by user demand. For years, I managed my own personal blog. It was hosted on DreamHost. I used WordPress to create it, and that was my blog. But I don't post there anymore. It was too hard to keep the software up to date. I was getting hacked, so it was too insecure. Comment spam. I mean, that was like a full-time job, basically. And, it was hard. When I eventually built another website for my book, American Spies, I had to pay a friend to do it because it would have taken me hours to catch back up and do it. Today, what I do mostly is I post on Facebook. I don't have to do any maintenance. I don't have to worry about security. And the eyeballs. I don't know how many people ever saw my blogs, but I know it was something far less than 10,000 people. And today I have more than 10,000 followers on Twitter because it's easy. That's where the people are. So if you want to easily reach out and speak to the world, today that peer-to-peer communication isn't the easiest thing for people to do. Centralized platforms have become a more efficient way for people like me and for people like, my parents to get out and to speak to the world. These network effects are powerful. And once you have these network effects, then how do you overcome that? So I think one question is, how will a decentralized web either defeat or compete with the benefits of centralization? And this isn't something that just people are interested in. Companies are interested in centralization too, for better service. Rather than building their own server farms, businesses contract with companies for cloud computing. And there's precious few companies that are actually dominant in the field. Amazon Web Services reportedly has something between 30 and 40% of the market share, and Microsoft's Azure is not that far behind. Similarly, you have content delivery networks. And content delivery networks provide value to companies because you have points of presence around the world. That helps with latency so that the service operates faster. It helps prevent or guard against DDoS attacks. And so again, in this field, there are very few companies, and they end up having an immense amount of the business. Some people have compared these cloud services to critical infrastructures like the water lines or submarine cables, but ultimately what it means is that there are a few businesses that are in the middle of people's computing, and as a result, these businesses have an immense amount of power and access to an immense amount of information. And that power and that information means control. Now, Brewster told me this morning that the technology to do these things that are so important to companies and to people in a decentralized way is evolving, that it's there, that it's not a pipe dream. And that makes me feel really optimistic and happy, so thank you for that. But I think my message is don't neglect these things or think they're not important, because if we build something that doesn't work for people, then people are going to work around it, and we're going to be right back in the situation where the forces for centralization can win. Okay, my second point is why did we end up with this data surveillance nightmare that we have today? And I think to a large extent it's because people don't like paying for stuff. People don't want to pay. And, the idea is information is free, but not free as in free lunch, but people still like a free lunch. And free is a feature, but free is also coming at a price. And so companies that have access to this information think, why don't we make some money off of this stuff? We can advertise to it. Sometimes we can sell it to data aggregators, and they can advertise to it. And so this puts us in a position where our data is basically not ours anymore. It's out there and being used for purposes that we may not like, that we don't really fully understand, that are complicated. So these business models have driven the surveillance economy to a large extent. What are we going to do about those business models? Are we going to ask people to pay? And if people pay, how many people will be left out because they can't afford it? We need some way to make it worthwhile for innovators and investors to put into this new network without it becoming this data apocalypse. And that brings me to the main part of my job, which is government surveillance. Today is the golden age of surveillance. Technology is generating more information about us than ever before. And increasingly, it's making a map of everything we do and changing the balance of power between individuals and the government. We used to be able to do things that nobody would ever notice, and they would disappear into the ether. Now all that stuff is tracked. In the olden days, if you wanted to know where I was 4 months ago, you had no way of finding out. Now you can just go to my cell provider and get my cell tower data. If you wanted to know what kind of conversation my mom and I had, if we talked on the phone or in chat or email, and it's available. And send all my core. It wasn't clear what or whether there was sufficient legal protection for this information, and I'm talking just in the United States. So, all of this data about us, our location, our web browsing, our search histories, data generated via IoT devices, the US government has a theory that this information is not protected constitutionally. Because you don't have a reasonable expectation of privacy in it because you've given it up to third parties. And unless there's a statute where Congress has seen fit to say, well, this type of information is protected, then there may be no protection at all. The government can get it with a subpoena, which is basically something that a lawyer writes in her office, or something where a judge doesn't really have to look at it and say, you've got a good reason to have this information. At the ACLU, we've been fighting this. Everybody in the civil liberties community has been fighting this. The first fight was for email. It's interesting to note that even though email is so old, there is only one federal court case that has explicitly found that email is private and protected by the Fourth Amendment. Fortunately, the companies all follow that rule, and we now have a bunch of sort of dicta statements from Supreme Court justices suggesting that the vast majority of them actually agree that email should be private and protected under the Fourth Amendment. But what about location? What about search histories? What about these other things? Well, recently, this past term, the ACLU won a case called Carpenter, and in Carpenter, the issue was about retrospective cell site location information. The government had said it's not protected by the Fourth Amendment because cell phone companies collect it, and you kind of know about that. And the court said, no, this kind of information is so intimate, and you don't really voluntarily have a choice about whether to use your cell phone and give this information up or not. So the Fourth Amendment protects it. That means a judge has to say there's a good reason for you to get information from this person or about this person. Where will Carpenter go? This is a situation in which the law, both commercial privacy law, which is spotty at best in the United States, and surveillance law have failed to protect the information that this new technology generated. It's going to get worse because of IoT devices and home monitors and that sort of thing. We need to think about this. We need to think about this not just from a technological point of view, but also from a legal point of view. How are we going to protect this data? And when we think about protecting this data, we're doing it against a formidable opposition, a formidable opponent. And that's not just the US government, that's governments around the world. Governments around the world have gotten used to this data. And they have used technology to try to get more. And there's a long history of the governments, including US government, asking internet providers and companies to help out with surveillance. If we built a technology that didn't collect this information, where surveillance was hard again, what would these governments say? Are they going to be comfortable with a sorry, you're out of luck kind of answer? They're going to push back. And we know that because we've seen it. Even here in the United States, I say even here in the United States because even though I think our surveillance law is terrible, I think it's better than everywhere else in the world, so it's a little complicated relationship I have with our government. But we still see, the government has pushed the Clipper chip to backdoor encryption, export controls, CALEA mandating wiretappability of the phone network, today's going dark debate to try to mandate wiretappability of the internet, discussions of obligatory data retention so that companies that generate data have to keep it, cases where the government has sought to force technology companies to turn on microphones in cars, with the sort of car on board computer device, to force companies to put back doors in their products or prevent companies from patching products that are insecure where the government knows how to compromise them. I think everybody here is familiar with the Apple versus FBI case where the government tried to force Apple to create code so that safeguards on the phone that prevented it from having the lock guessed would be disabled so that they could get access to this information. What we've seen is that even when technology isn't designed to facilitate surveillance, governments are there saying, and putting the pressure on, saying, you've got to make it so. So what are we going to do about this? We need to have a plan. We need to have an understanding. It's not just in the US, it's in China, it's in Turkey, it's in Poland, but it's also not just governments. There are a lot of people out there who publicly support the surveillance initiatives by governments. People ask, why shouldn't companies help out the government? And so we need to think about how we're going to talk about this issue, how we're going to explain why privacy is important, how we're going to help people understand that we shouldn't have a life that is entirely documented and available for inspection with the just probable cause to look at it, which is the Fourth Amendment warrant standard. We need to be able to have this conversation and to win over people's hearts and minds and have them understand why our position is ethically and normatively valuable. Now I'm going to talk about what I think in many ways is one of the hardest issues, which is freedom of expression, speech. For many of us, the promise of the open internet, where information is free and people can speak their minds, is a kind of utopia. I'm a vehement believer in free speech. I think, I'm at the ACLU. I think if you look at anything I've said or done, I think you can see it. To me, personal expression is a fundamental human right. It helps people discover the truth. It helps you become more human. It is a counter to the powers that be, whether it be governments or businesses, telling you what to think and telling you what is true. I don't think that the elites should be arbitrators of what I can say or what I can learn. Many, many, many people do not share this opinion. And the people who disagree with me, it's not along like your traditional red, blue, Democratic, Republican lines. People hate hate speech. People hate online harassment. People hate trolling. People hate terrorist recruitment. People hate child pornography. People hate 3D printable guns. And, what's happened is now that we have this centralization for Facebooks and Twitters and Googles, these interests, government, corporate, are coming and putting pressure on Facebook, Twitter, Google, to take care of these problems, to do something. It started with copyright. Copyright infringement is bad for business models, it's dangerous, you've got to do something about it. And, we struck a balance there with the DMCA that, basically kind of worked. Although, as time has evolved, we see more licensing and less sort of information that's out there. So, you have I just want to point company can't. 50 million, that's obvious. Legislators call for Facebook to somehow do something about fake news, whatever that is. This is because, for better or for worse, some people suck. And the rest of us don't want those sucky people to screw it up for us. And so, people who don't have this idea of the internet dream, people who think that this is just a libertarian, white, male, commercial abrogation of responsibility on the part of these big US-based companies that just don't care about racial equality or justice or, whether there's ethnic cleansing or lynchings or that sort of thing. They think, look, you've got the power, do something about it. Use this power to control what people say, what people see, what people do. For me, the issue, among a lot of other things, is that this empowers internet companies and governments to do the thing that I always hoped they wouldn't, which is tell us what's true and control what we see and what we can say. It's not just for these hate speech reasons and for this violent stuff, but it's also for privacy as well, which is a value that I take very seriously, and I think a lot of people in this room are here to try to achieve. I talked about Germany's law. France and Europe now have the GDPR, and that's a law that says that you need to take down some personal information upon request of the person that the information's about. That's a very valuable right when you're talking about a back-end database. But when you're talking about a public-facing web and you're saying that people can say, I don't want that thing about me online anymore, so don't tell people I stole money or don't tell people that my business sucks or whatever it is, that is terrible for speech. And these countries are not just enforcing it within their borders. If they did, that would be bad enough. It would be a balkanization of the global internet so that the internet I saw in the United States was different from what you see in Canada, different from France, different from Germany, different from Brazil. It's actually worse than that because France wants to impose these rules globally. So anyone who operates in France has to take this stuff down globally, and if you don't, there's a penalty. And what that means is it's the race to the bottom, the lowest common denominator, so that all we'll see is what everybody agrees is okay to see. So, when companies are asked to make these decisions, obviously they're going to make mistakes. Twitter suspended a satirical magazine for mocking a politician. Facebook has taken down a photo of a bra draped over a double speed bump sign. Some people claim that these platforms are disproportionately censoring conservative speech. Some people have done studies that suggest that speech that is against white people is taken down with much more regularity than speech that hurts people of color. We have hundreds and hundreds of examples of decisions by companies about taking stuff down where it was wrong, where it was the wrong decision. And there are millions more probably that we don't know about. Why do I say millions? Because even if there's a tiny percentage of mistakes, and these questions can be very, very hard, even a tiny percentage of mistakes at scale means hundreds of millions, billions of posts are censored every year. Moreover, once you have this process in place where you can do this censorship, governments around the world are going to come and put pressure. They're going to say, we don't like this post by of us, so we turned. If we do this, the existing power structures will be reinforced. Only the biggest, the richest, the most consolidated will be able to afford to comply with these regulations. And the problem is, to me, it seems like mostly people, other people, not us, but mostly people are comfortable with these outcomes, so long as they work well enough for the majority of mainstream citizens. So long as the mistakes mostly impact minorities, whether it be ideological minorities, religious minorities, racial minorities, ideological minorities, people don't have the appetite for changing from what we are now. People didn't have the appetite for what the early internet could have been. So what I think is that we need to ask our questions, what are we going to do about this? Does a decentralized, secure web have a plan for hate speech, terrorist recruitment, incitement to violence, and disinformation? What are we going to do about that? What is the plan? I can see how giving people the power individually to locally block trolls and Nazis and make the decisions for themselves about what they see is a great idea. And I think a decentralized web gives people, individuals, should give people, individuals, the technical ability to do that, and that's awesome. But what it doesn't do is stop terrorists from recruiting. It doesn't stop people from planning attacks on the internet. It doesn't stop incitements to violence. So there's these other problems that governments are concerned with, that they're going to put pressure, that people are concerned with, they're going to put pressure on the web to help take care of. What are we going to do about that? What are we going to say? And you can see that. The technology alone, the inability of the technology to address it isn't enough of a burden, isn't enough of a reason to give to people who say you should do stuff. I mean, WhatsApp is encrypted end to end, but they're still under an incredible amount of pressure to try to find some way to control what goes over the network because it's being used to spread false news that results in people being killed in India, for example. The debates are cast by people as about the company's ethics and accountability. But really, this is about our ethics and accountability. This is about the public, generally, and what kind of world we want to build. And how do we, as people who have this dream, who know how valuable this is, how do we communicate that in a meaningful way to other people, taking into account their legitimate needs? Their legitimate needs for a better user interface, their legitimate needs for wanting access to this amazing technology without having to pay prices that they can't afford, this legitimate need to figure out how to stop people from being so shitty to each other. And I think these are difficult situations, maybe more difficult sometimes than we give them credit for. In response, regular people, governments, and companies have made choices that have unfortunately led to this situation where the network is more closed. In building a better future with more staying power, we need to pay attention to these pressures and take them into account. The market choices, the norms, and the law, and see how these impact the technology. These other forces are the things that placed us where we are today. Not so much the early technology of the internet, but these other things which have put pressure on it to change. And we, if we're going to build a new and better future, have to take them into account too, in order to achieve a lasting and preserve the goal of a more private, a more secure, a more censorship resistant, and a more open web. Thank you for your attention, and I guess I can take some questions, right? Thank you.
Questions for Jennifer. Raise your hands and we'll come find you.
Thank you very much for your informative talk. A lot of people in the past few days have been talking about how advertising is the original sin of the internet, how the commercialization of the web has led to a lot of the problems you discussed today. How do you think we can align commercial interests with people's digital rights and freedoms?
So first I'll say is that I came here to complain about problems, not to solve them, because solving them is really hard. And that's why I thought you guys were going to do. But I don't know, because I mean commercial. This is I've never in all my lifetime here in the United States I've never we see commercialization sort of infects everything. I'm not sure we're not going to change capitalism, at least not in the next couple of years. So we have to kind of take that into account and figure out some way like faith and ideology and still accommodate what we need for privacy. So I don't actually know. I mean, maybe, I don't know. Maybe there's better anonymization. Maybe there's ways that we can, pay. I don't know. It's a great question, and I don't have an answer. I'm sorry. Any other really difficult questions I don't know the answer to? Yes.
My name is Kent Bai, and I do the Voices of VR podcast. And virtual reality and biometric data, I think, is a new frontier that is, you mentioned IoT as one of the risks, but I see that like eye tracking data, heart rate variability, galvanic skin response, our eye tracking data, our way that we move our bodies, these are all biometric indicators that can be personally identifiable potentially. But they're also very intimate, and I'm just curious, like, what is happening in the larger either ACLU or civil rights when it comes to what should be done around the legal policy perspective of biometric data and what should or should not be collected and aggregated on these centralized sites?
Yeah, great question. And I can answer it. There's two main fronts on which we operate. One is statutory law, so legislatures or the Congress passes a law, and the other is constitutional law where courts find that it should be protected. So in states, there have been a lot of efforts to pass laws that are like biometric privacy laws that protect some of this information, either prevent companies from collecting it or prevent companies from using it for marketing or distributing to governments or that sort of thing. But our real push has been in the constitutional level. So when we won the Carpenter case, which was about location data, retrospective location data, the idea behind Carpenter is to say, just because data is in the hands of a third party, just because some company has it, doesn't mean that the government can come and use it without a good reason, right? You need to have a warrant, you need to have specific cause that's about a particular person, and then you can come and use it. A lot of people feel like for some kinds of data, probable cause isn't enough. It's so intimate, you need something more than that. And then there are situations where it's not really the government getting data, but they're still learning very important, very interesting things about people. There was that recent case where they were looking for somebody who was a serial killer, submitted DNA to Ancestry or 23andMe, and then found relatives of the person, and then ultimately we're able to find the person. This is a frontier where the applications aren't even clear to us or to the regulators, and so it makes it very hard to figure out what we're going to do. But between statutory regulation and constitutional protections, we're looking to try to take this sensitivity of biometric data in DNA, et cetera, and protect it. It's not easy. There are Supreme Court cases that say you shed DNA and that's just like garbage you threw out. They can test it without any, without needing to have any cause. So it's a struggle, but it took us 10 or 15 years to win Carpenter, and we're in it. So maybe we're like 7 years in.
Time for one last question. Time for one last question.
I was wondering what your position was on CFIUS expansion and
on what?
on CFIUS expansion and the impact that has on an open internet structurally, bolstering U.S. privacy protections.
I'm sorry.
The current
Can you hold it just a
the
second?
current legislation that just passed the Senate, the CFIUS expansion, and the impact that's going to have on an open internet. CFIUS. Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States.
Okay, I'm not sure I know about this, but okay. Maybe that's why I didn't understand what you're saying.
Right. And what impact that's going to have structurally on an open internet. And
I'm sorry, I can't. Can you?
So
the
question was
it's fuzzy to me. I can't really hear what.
The question was.
Involved. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your talk. You phrased, or you framed the debate on free speech about the rise of concern about people being shitty to each other, and the call for centralized intermediaries to do something about that, and how that empowers them to just take an active stance with censorship and things like that. And then you framed the question to people building the decentralized web, what's your plan for the internet? And yet bolster the voices that might yell at that person, and ultimately together we'll come up with a better idea. Can we convince people about that, or is that not something you can convince people about in the era of fake news, and we've got so many voices, nobody knows what's true anymore? Maybe more speech is worse.
I think the internet, as we envisioned it, is beautiful because it empowers great speech, things we want, political organizing, that sort of thing. I look at things like Me Too or Black Lives Matter. I don't think those movements would necessarily have been so successful if they had to convince the nightly news to carry the allegations, to carry the information. So, but the same thing, it floats all boats, right? The rising tide floats all boats. So people who you don't want do well too. And, some cases more speech is going to make a difference. I think there's a lot of other work, in particular on terrorism and why people become terrorists and what, the counter challenges are to that are not so much convincing people, but providing them with more opportunities, addressing psychological illnesses and those sorts of things. And so I think that we've got other plans, you know, and we need to take those plans because the risk of squelching so-called terrorists means we're also squelching you know, activists too. And so we have to be very careful about how we do that sort of thing, and we can't build it into the technology, into the structure, because we know it'll be misused. We know it'll be used for ill. I don't think most people agree with that. I could be wrong, but I don't think most people understand that. I think most people think that, well, I don't want to say most people, a lot of people think that you can take down speech, you should take down speech, and if you get it wrong sometimes you get it wrong. And I really think in some ways this is...
To hear the Can the DWeb Combat Censorship, Prosecution, and Government Interference panel. That's in the Hash Lounge. We're going to take just a minute to turn this around, but you won't want to go away because the founder of the Internet Archive, Brewster Kahle, is going to be demonstrating some very newly working code. We'll be back in a minute. Thank you.
Great. Why don't we get started? I love the way Jennifer started her talk, that this is an optimistic gathering and a summit to try to figure out what it is we should do next. But I don't think we're trying to be blindly optimistic in that sort of techno-utopian way. We're trying to basically bring a lot of different voices to bear to figure out what it is we should do next. A lot of us got our start when we had real control over what it is we said on the internet, and it was amazing. We could go and see things that were out there, and it became more and more centralized. And I think Jennifer was absolutely right as to why. I mean, we wanted it that way, and it was easier that way, and it was more reliable that way than trying to have websites or Gopher sites or FTP sites on these computers that are underneath our desks. I mean, those days were not very reliable or very findable and very useful, and things have gotten a lot better. So I'm not suggesting we go back there, but I think we can go further than where we are. I think we've demonstrated some of the value of going and having centralized resources, centralized data farms and the like, but who's controlling those is sometimes getting people in trouble. And it's actually getting those companies in trouble, I would say. I mean, why, if you were a technologist at Facebook or Apple, why would you think you should be taking the role of figuring out what people say in Sri Lanka? I mean, that's kind of a little brand extension there, and I don't think a welcome one. So if we can make a system that works well, balancing the new technologies going forward, I think we're in much better shape. For me, the real kick in the pants that got me realizing that we're not quite getting where we wanted to go was the Snowden revelations. So we'd been making progress towards building this sort of global library, if you will, this internet communication system. That was a whole lot better than the world was 50 years ago in trying to get your products out there and the like. You could make a website and find its natural audience. All that thing was kind of going well. And then there was this sort of clarion call from Edward Snowden saying, it's not the way you think it is, that there are people spying on you at scale. And we kind of knew some of this was going on, but it didn't really completely saturate into me before it was sort of like, okay, these are the programs that are going on. Our trust is being betrayed. I believe that the World Wide Web has been this sharing extravaganza. It's been this time when people have made their thoughts and ideas much more known than I think in previous times. My sister had her journal with a little lock on it, and she hid it from me, her brother, because she didn't want her stuff to be seen by me. The equivalent of my sister now would have all of her stuff on Facebook for anybody to be able to see. We've really had an experience of trying to trust other people with things that were very intimate. The next real kick in the pants for me was the last presidential election and how it proceeded. The media was completely captivated by a really expert social reality star. And he swamped the media. And he was able to just captivate people in this sort of, I think Jon Stewart called it, he's an internet troll for president. He basically was able to step on all sorts of buttons that made people just continuously want to go and pay attention to him. And it worked. We studied all of the television through that whole period and found that Trump was mentioned more times than all of the other candidates combined, even when there were 12 candidates oh, that hurt. In the Republican, yeah, this is not the best. Yes, right, hard drives aren't as hardened as that requires. So, we had some challenges. So, I've really thrown myself, and I think you guys are as well, by being here and by thinking about this, to try to figure out how do we go and take some of the technology and the momentum and the positive trusting, how do we move it forward? How do we increase and improve the technology to be able to have another round at this? Our goal is universal access to all knowledge. And I'm going to go over in this talk some of the cool technologies that we get to play with to build this next generation. Then I'm going to demonstrate how far we've come as the Internet Archive to try to get this somewhat working. And then I'm going to pose at the end a laundry list of the problems that have been identified in the preparation for this meeting, to try to figure out what are the problems. If we solve some of these problems and make some progress on them, then we have a path towards really moving forward. So that's the structure of this talk. Decentralizing the Internet Archive. We wanted to eat our own dog food. We think that we can do this, not just for the Internet Archive, but put anything else. Can we decentralize Twitter? Can we decentralize Slack? Can we decentralize all these other cool, awesome services, Google Docs, scientific publishing? Can we go and take the things that we're doing and decentralize them? And what does that exactly mean? And what do we mean by that? And I think we're still even trying to come up with exactly what those things are. And the demo is going to be here, and I'm going to encourage you to take out your phones and laptops and try it. I'm going to go over the 5 things that I think are sort of spine-tinglingly magic. You know, I don't know. The first time I used Alta Vista, and it just worked, it was sort of like, whoa. You know, I don't know. Do you have those sorts of like those moments? It's like, wow, something is really different here. Or the first time you talked to Siri and found a Mexican restaurant that was awesome and it was right nearby. You know, and it was just like, whoa, this is cool. I'm gonna go over 5 that have those characteristics for me. There's gonna be something a little geeky, but let me try to explain why these building components could be so important. Content addressability. Content addressability is you can take a file of any size and come up with a hash, one of those sort of incomprehensible things, and be able to go and refer to that file one-to-one. It is, if you hold on to that thing, you in some sense have this big file and it's only this size. Content addressability. Now it's the fundamental piece of BitTorrent. So BitTorrent, you can just tell somebody a little torrent file and it's a content hash. And then there's a system for going and conjuring it from the Netherlands, the ether. You can basically say, I have this, I want it, and it comes to you. Content addressability with this is astonishing. It means that you can go and have a file system that lives everywhere and nowhere, and you can go and cause things to come together, and if you have it, you know you have it because they clean out the importance of blah, 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 blah. And especially when you put in the WIT-Diffie public-private key thing. Not only can you go and encrypt something to make it just impossible for somebody else to know what it is that you've done, but there's also signatures. So you can sign things and make it so that it is unforgeable. Why is that important? If you have unforgeable documents, that means you can have documents in multiple places, and you don't have to care about the provenance of where you got it from. The Internet Archive and the Wayback Machine has power in the universe because we take care to make sure that our data is safe, such that when we say that was what this politician said or this corporation said 10 years ago, you trust it. Why did you trust it? Because you trust us as an organization and our servers. We're trying, okay, but what if you didn't have to? What if you could have signatures to be able to know that that's what existed at that time and that that person said it? It means that you don't have to have as much trust in infrastructure and organizations, even our own, to be able to make this world work. The magic of encryption is pretty amazing. Tim Berners-Lee didn't have access to it because it was illegal to export in the United States 25 years ago. It was deemed so important, so powerful, it was regulated as a weapon, right? It's that level of importance to the universe that the encryption is that we've got to play with now, and we won those wars. Let's use it for something real. I love the critique that, you know, we won the whole crypto wars, and the only thing we got was securing our credit card records going over the internet with HTTP, and that was so sad. On system, these things are you'd have a modem and but what you get now with a well-connected internet is not only that you can connect to one place in Korea, you can connect to a lot of places. And you can connect to lots of people that you don't even know. And that's, I think, some of the magic of BitTorrent, is you're connecting to other people that have pieces of files that are all participating towards making your world better that you don't even know. So a well-connected internet means a browser that can connect to 100 places at once and have that all work. If we lose this, a lot of what it is we're all talking about here goes away, and there's risk to losing it. Okay, only two left of my magics, and then I'll hit my demo, and then scrolling list of problems to solve. Safely downloadable code. I had one of those mind explosions when Jason Scott at the Internet Archive said, we're going to go and take software and we're going to emulate it on the open internet in this way that I thought was just freaking impossible. He said, okay, Bruce, it's gonna work. Okay. There's this community that builds C code that makes old IBM PCs and Atari platforms that really barely work if you spend a long time in your basement trying to make it work. But there's these emulators for these old platforms. Then there's these other communities that have been ripping the proms and the floppies from these old machines. What we're gonna do, Brewster, it's gonna work, is we're gonna take the C code, cross-compile it into JavaScript, and then we're gonna go and load the JavaScript, boot an IBM PC in your browser, and then we're gonna have it go and contact the Internet Archive, download the floppy, and it's going to run and be your old game playing. And I said, that'll never work. I said, give me a year. And there was a bunch of people in Scripton and the game emulator folks, and they made it work. And the brain thing was not, it's like, that's cool, right? We're getting to relive our 8-bit past. But what I saw was, you can go and run a computer, a 15-year-old computer at speed by downloading it and running it in your browser safely. That JavaScript and now WebAssembly make it so that you can go and run computers in your browser without having to trust it. That the whole problem of viruses that make it so that we don't want to go and download software, and why Apple goes and approves everything that's on its store, isn't as necessary in the JavaScript world. This means when export web browser can go and play and be easily and smoothly. And that's crippling. We have advertisements. It's basically been the only real mechanism for doing this stuff, and we know what happens with that. We get spy networks that are just hyper-tuned. We have those AIs pointing at us. But if we had an ability to go and pay something for things, it would make a brand new day. And I like the line that Bitcoin is basically money with an API, or it starts to go a little bit closer back to cash, so you can actually just buy something from somebody by taking a buck out, hand it to them, they hand you back something. Awesome, that's good. In the internet, we fouled all of that up. We ended up with credit cards and PayPal and third parties, and we ended up with centralization because it was the only way to sell something. So with this, we have an ability to do something beyond it. Those magic components, I think, bring something together. And so what I'm going to suggest is we can go and build something different. And I sent off Mitra Ardran, who's here somewhere, there's Mitra, and I gave him the impossible task. I said, make the Internet Archive, 40 petabytes, available, decentralized, on the internet, where we're using these technologies so that stuff is coming from anywhere and nowhere, and try to get that going, and do it such that it works for anybody in an existing browser. So you don't get to go and download a new thing. You don't even get an extension. You have to just make it so that anybody can smoothly upgrade from the existing point-to-point World Wide Web to the decentralized peer-to-peer back end of the web. So I'm using the goal here is a peer-to-peer back end of the web that works as easily and smoothly as the current web. And are we there? At least I've got a demo, right? It's working pretty well. And so if you go to dweb.archive.org, or you go to archive.org first, see what it is the website is in terms of using audio or video, and then try putting a DWeb : in front of it. So I'm going to do that. Let's see if I can pull this off. dweb.archive.org, and this I'm using Chrome, but it also seems to work well in Firefox, and actually surprisingly in Safari. Okay, actually, the best way to do this is to do this with the developer console up. JavaScript console, Mitra? All right, so usually if you just went to archive.org, yeah, we run some JavaScript and stuff, but it's pretty minimal. Like, well, it looks like really minimal. And you click around and you can see things and go to Freilinger Archives, which is a bunch of old movies. And I guess there's no JavaScript running on this stuff at all, right? Or something. Or my internet's not even working very well. Okay, so, but if we just go now to archive.org and go to dweb.archive.org. If this works, you have to applaud. All right, here I go. It's loading up HTTP, YJS, IPFS, WebTorrent, and blam. And there is a hell of a lot going on in this JavaScript platform because it's pulling these materials from lots of different places. And let's go to this Prelinger archives. And all of these little thumbnails, where are the thumbnails coming from? IPFS, and then if I click on one of these movies, this right now is actually using IPFS to go and pull that movie and play it. And it's a silent movie of these breath takers. That's working. And I can actually turn off, should I try this, Mitra? I'm going to turn off IPFS, and I'm going to refresh this, and it's now going to reload. It's bringing in a lot of JavaScript. All right, I'm going to go to the collections page. Go back to archive.org. I'm going to turn off IPFS, and I'm going to the same movie. Yes, okay. So now I'm going to this, and there's two peers. I'm serving off of two peers, and this movie is coming over WebTorrent, which is a BitTorrent implemented in JavaScript by Faraz, who's here, and John, who's here. There's a bunch of people that have all worked to try to make JavaScript version of IPFS. And we're now downloading at 22%, our download speeds. If there are other people here using this, I'm now uploading to somebody, right? So by reading, I'm writing. So I'm participating in this with just a mountain of JavaScript that's running and actually working towards making this happen. So I'm downloading at 300 kilobytes per second and uploading at about the same. And there are three speeds. And if you guys, more of you got online, and we're looking at this page, it would all be working. Pretty cool, huh? So if we can make the archive but decentralized, let's make Slack but decentralized. Let's make a lot of these other things but decentralized. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my talk and find it. I'm just flipping to a new browser here. So I'm trying to suggest that this conference has been about global vision and working code. That we have global visions, let's take into account lots of different points of views. We're trying to make the next generation, but let's actually go and do stuff that works. And doing some of this stuff is hard. This is not as easy as making a web server. A web server you could write in Perl in an afternoon, and a lot of people did back in the day. Going and making decentralized things like Bitcoin work, or the internet, the original internet structure, and making that work is not at all easy. Here are some of the challenges, benefits and challenges that you get if we were to commit towards this. What we like about this is it's archivable in the sense that we at the Internet Archive have been taking snapshots of people's web pages and putting it into the Wayback Machine. That's cool, but it's just what the websites look like. It's not the website. So when those websites blink off, we can't go and just continue to run it. What if you could actually go and snapshot working whole websites. So when the government decides that they don't want to do that Health and Human Services website for medical information anymore, okay, we can do it. And not only can we do it in such a way that people can get access to the search engines and the databases, but people can continue to add information to it. That would be a reliable system. Another is censorship resistance. So I wrote to, I was in China, and the Internet Archive is blocked completely in China. As best I can tell, because we have 2 videos from the Uyghurs on the Internet Archive. And the Chinese embassy came to us and said, we want you to take them down. And we said, are they against the law in your country? And they said, yes. And said, okay, we'll take them down for your country. And they said, not good enough. You have to take it down for the whole world. We said, we don't do that. And they said, we're going to turn you off. They turned us off. And there may be other reasons why they've turned us off, but the Internet Archive, with 40 petabytes, millions of books, a lot of those paid for by the Department of Education of China, are not available to the Chinese population. This is stupid. We think that we're blinked off in Turkey. We're blinking off every so often. They turn us off in parts of India. This doesn't make any sense. So it can be more censorship resistant. So I wrote to Mitra a bunch of months ago when I was there, hey, I'm in China, I'm blocked, can your thing work? And he said, not yet. That there's all of these systems have got still single points of failure. So we still have work to do to be able to make this work, but this is one of the benefits if we succeed in what we're doing. We also can work in poorly connected areas so that people can go and get to the wealth theoretically impossible. But we can get more privacy this way. Why? That data stored by third parties, but nobody else can read it except for you. So I think that this more of an encrypted file distribution gives us more privacy. Another benefit is business models beyond advertising. How can we sell directly? And I think it'll be fun and a much more malleable net. Why? Because JavaScript is the magic of active websites. It's, I think, a lot of reasons why apps on your phone just feel a lot better. It's not JavaScript, it's just local code running. So if we can make more of our services more active in our browsers and make that. All right, I'm going to hit 13 withering list of the challenges that we determined we needed to solve before we could get going at this. Yesterday was largely, let's explore of the decentralized web technologies that are going on now. And this today is basically there are workshops on every one of these, and people have been working on these. And if you have ideas or affinity towards solving these problems, these 13 we need to have pretty good ideas on to be able to make forward progress. For instance, how do you name decentralized websites? What's the URL of the decentralized web? Tim Berners-Lee said yesterday the key thing of the World Wide Web was the URL, the URI. And it allowed us to build on each other, to link, to make all of our service not be these little separate siloed things that we're starting to see come about around apps. Can we have names and URIs that work? Permissions, authentication, and key management in the all of this is encrypted, and trying to hold on to your keys is really hard. I used to say, oh, key management, and before Bitcoin, and people said, I tried trying to get PGP to work with my email. I just can't get it to work, or if I can get it to work, nobody else can. And it's just like, it's a nightmare. But the Bitcoin crowd with the wallets really made it so that we could do some of this. And they have the whole long words thing, and it's been evolving pretty fast. So there's reason to believe that we can do key management. And a lot of the key people that are in the browsers are here today, which is excellent. And there's active, good conversations towards bringing this about. Identity and reputation. Who are you? How do you go and say what you are? Can we migrate our identity so that Internet Archive but decentralized is read-only? Why isn't it writable? Because we can't figure out how you log in a decentralized website. So if we can figure that out, we can make real progress. How do you handle mutable data? BitTorrent is all about moving around static files. But what do you do about having databases that exist in this sort of decentralized way? Gun and YJS are making real progress in the JavaScript approach. There are a bunch of other even startups here today that are trying to do this. It's an interesting problem. I'm just going to read these because it's a little bit too much. But archiving the decentralized web, who should do it? How should it be done? Reader privacy, how do we go and really make that come true? What do we do about takedowns? Right now we're starting to see hashes of files starting to be circulated. Maybe that's the way it's going to happen as opposed to take it down from this website. Advertising, how do we get it to the first people? If you set up a decentralized website that sells something, almost anything, especially if it's like under 10 bucks, I'm gonna buy it. I'm gonna go and try. Just let's go and show that you can go and publish books, music, video on a decentralized web without having somebody in the middle. Can we make it work in the browsers today? Is that a requirement? Or are we gonna have to have Beaker Browser or Brave or some of the new guys that are willing to go and be more nimble than the existing browsers in terms of baking things in? Or can we make it work at the JavaScript layer? The storage, IPFS, there's different technologies coming around. Governance in the DWeb, what does that even mean? What do some of the terms mean? Like DWeb, who owns that? How is that going to, decentralized is starting to become a buzzword. I think Silicon Valley really helped with that. It's a buzzword without even knowing what it is. So how do we go and anchor some of these terms and have some UIs that we really want to work with? To help, please try to think of how to make blank but decentralized. And we tried to lead off and working towards today. Mitra and a bunch of others, lots of others that are here today, have been working to try to lead this by saying we're committing to make the Internet Archive but decentralized. Thank you to Mitra, archive engineers, WebTorrent, IPFS, YGS, and others. Thank you very much.
Brewster Kahle, thank you very much for that presentation on a game with many winners. You've brought so many winners together for both the first Decentralized Web Summit in 2016, and you've done a great job of bringing us all together in 2018. Many of the creators of the decentralized web and of the apps that you've mentioned today are here in the audience, so let's go ahead and open the floor up to some questions.
Or coffee.
Thank you, Brewster. I use archive.org a lot, and I thank you. And one of the challenges I have is about the copyright and IP. Because I have seen things there, they are labeled as open source, but they're actually not. And with decentralized web, the issue will become more, it's becoming bigger, right? How do you protect those IPs? And that's a challenge, and I want to ask your opinion on that.
Yes, how do we deal with copyrighted materials that might be on the Internet Archive or other places that say they're public domain, but they're not? What do we do about this? This isn't a panacea, I think, either way, though I think there are some dangers to the decentralized web in that it's less controllable. It's going to be harder to go and just ask one website to take something down and then it's disappeared for everybody. And I think there's good and bad to that. I mean, the good thing is it stays up. The bad thing is sometimes things that shouldn't be up stay up. I think that we're seeing a migration, especially in this platform era of YouTube, and where the same things are being uploaded over and over again, that the concept for those is it's not a URL that defines what it is you want to have taken down if you're the owner of something. It's a hash. And saying that these are the hashes that you want to take down. And that's a blessing and a curse as well. We're seeing some of the, in Europe, they're circulating large numbers of hashes that are copyrighted materials, and they're demanding that things are preemptively taken down before even there's a way of looking at them. So how we deal with some of these things is going to evolve. But I've been now involved in the internet revolution, the web evolution of the first generation, and hopefully we make a decentralized web revolution happen. And every time these have happened, there have been enormous status quo organizations that have been pushing against it. They basically said, I don't like this, or as my wife says, they're not going to like it. And we've gotten through it anyway. The internet worked, the World Wide Web worked. We can make the decentralized web work, but it is changing some of the balances and what's easy and hard. Yes, but if you change one letter, the hash changes. But if that's the way people know of it, then it's effectively taking it away. Right? If you're basically finding things because of its hash, if you change its hash, yes, the file may still be there, but then you have to advertise it all over again. So it's not a slam dunk. This is not a system that is going to be the panacea for every copyright owner that wants to shut everything down. But it's also not going to be the complete free-for-all that I'm sure people are worrying about.
Hey, Brewster, I wanted to push back just a little on this idea of micropayments and ask you to think about micropayments under conditions of grave inequality. What does it mean? You know, it's obviously unjust that you have to be spied on to participate in discourse, but what does it mean in a world in which the vast majority have so much less than the tiny minority that we're going to make access to culture conditioned on your capacity to pay?
Oh, so let me see if so what would happen if we made more things be charged for than free with advertising? What will the effect be? When I started the Waze project, this Waze, but not the Waze that you used to get here, way back when, I went and read up a lot on the history of printing and what happened in the eras of sort of book publishing, and then in the 20th century with magazine publishing, radio, television. Magazines, radio, television, newspapers were advertising based mostly. And the book publishing industry was a royalty-based system that evolved. And I really like the royalty-based system. It's not that I don't want anything under an advertising-based system or freely available under that kind of a system. But the royalty-based system has a lot of good things going for it. There's, at least for a good 300 years, we had no centralized points of control in the distribution. We had lots of authors, lots of printers, lots of booksellers, lots of eventually publishers, and lots of readers. And in that Larry Lessig sense, there wasn't anybody that controlled any part of that pipeline, and it basically worked very well towards having a very decentralized distribution structure where some people made money. There was other systems like the academic publishing where everything was basically free for a long time. And then there's the advertising model tends towards making things get hoovered up into monopolies. And you end up, because it's how the ad networks, sales forces work. Unless you have strict regulations keeping people apart in geographic locales, they tend to hoover into one or a few different ad network sales forces, and it collapses the number of publishers. So I think we've seen some of the problems with that. The nice thing is, it appears to be free. The downside is that we've ended up with the Facebooks and Googles really sucking all the air out of the room, not just in one country, but in many countries around the world. So I'm looking for diversity. Let's make it so that there's different mechanisms for people to go and make things available. And I think a lot of people will choose to make things available for free. And having make it so that it doesn't cost you to distribute materials is really good. I think that's one of the great things about the internet is the commons rides for free, mostly. And by organizations like the Internet Archive that will host anything that's available for free, that's distributable for free, and it doesn't cost people. So I think we can have sort of our cake and eat it too, by having a larger number of business models possible. Anything else?
We have time for a few more questions. Please keep your hands high.
Just to point out that books have had differential pricing in different markets for years and years, and there's nothing that prevents micropayment systems from having different prices for India than in the US.
Yes. We can have very different structures because we've got computers involved in all of it, for better and for worse.
Maybe a silly question, but so that address is over TLS, I can see. But when you access and also content hasn't been
that we start to evolve, that we've solved some of these problems, and you can make some assurances that, okay, the World Wide Web has these set of norms to it, and the DWeb have these set of norms to it. And if we can do that collectively so that the tools work a whole lot better, that we can start to make maybe not guarantees of privacy, but assurances that we're doing these practices to try to help your privacy, then I'd say we're in much better shape.
Brewster, I hate to push back on you about the one question back, but it sounds like you said to solve the problem of everyone being spied on, we're going to charge you money, and then to solve the problem of some people not being able to afford it, we're going to spy on everyone to decide who we're not going to charge money to. That's what differential pricing is, right? I mean, that sounds like the worst of both worlds to me.
I think we can make it so that you can sell something directly to somebody, so that there's not the third parties spying on what's being sold. But if you've got a relationship where you're going and buying something from somebody, then you might have a relationship with them. Or there's more of the crypto zero cash abilities to go and buy things where you just drop a coin in the box and you get the decryption key, and you can go and get the digital files that you've just purchased, but the seller doesn't need to know who you are, but they're paid. Will they charge you less because of this? Good question. I don't know. Don't have all the answers on this. What I'm looking for is a broader set of options for trying to build some of these systems and to make it easy to avoid some of the pitfalls that we've seen. All the solutions, no. But the idea of this conference, or at this stage, we wanted to at least show working code, and we've got 100 people now working at IPFS. There's real projects and real progress going on to build some of these decentralized components. But boy, they don't have user interfaces yet, right? We are still pretty primitive, but at least we're starting to see some things come to light.
And we'll take one last question.
Hi, Brewster. We're old friends, but I think there's a part of decentralization, and said that has to do. We still need trust. So the original intent wasn't just like nasty to have, MIT Press. It meant the knowledge meant something. And I think we have to consider, because when everybody makes anything, we don't have a language to have meaning, to understand how to curate. So there's part of free-for-all, which is wonderful, but then it also, what makes a culture is meaning, or things we believe in. And I think the language of that has to be considered, or otherwise it is a noise. And the whole point of exploring knowledge is to come together, to remove noise, to understand, to share. And so I think part of how do you rethink, the units of trust and the narrative and the language around that. And so that would go from just advertising to brand, and brand is supposed to have meaning. And that's another control.
So let me see if so in this world, we still need trust, like you need to know who it's coming from, if it's MIT Press, that has value. Absolutely. So let's make it so that MIT Press can survive. I talk and work with the university presses a lot, and they're being slaughtered. They are just losing it. They're not able to sell their works very effectively. It costs them a lot to go and print these things. And they're going and putting them in these fairly centralized servers and services that are taking too large a cut. And we're having a collapse in the number of people that feel that they can publish on the net. And these sorts of technologies actually are really about putting much more control in the sense of the providers, in being able to control what it is their things look like, but also control in the sense of the readers or the consumers of these, where they could control what it is they're giving to others, and being still able to go and use these materials. I can't stand it when I go to a site that is really hosted on Facebook, and I have to log into Facebook to be able to see something. So I think we're trying to pull some of the ability of control towards the large number of providers and large number of readers without having so much centralized control that has evolved in the last 20 years for all the reasons that Jennifer Granick pointed out, which is it makes the internet work better. Can we make the internet work better by going backwards a bit towards having some more control in the part of both the providers and the readers, and not as many third-party interlopers? That's the goal. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brewster, for a wonderful talk, and also for hosting and calling everyone to this conference. We've got over 1,000 people here at the 2018 Decentralized Web Summit with hundreds of events. Please take the challenges that Brewster brought up in his talk to the different tables that are meeting and addressing those issues today. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is going to be Primavera De Filippi in 15 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, she's probably in her session. She's in one of the little, she's in the Peabody room.
Okay.
She needs to get mic'd. Okay.
I think it's Corey Doc. Great. Yeah.
I am going to find her.
change their path. So thank you for doing that. Anyone else got a reaction? Something that you would want to fix? We got another half day we could fix? Indeed. So one of the feedbacks that we got overnight was that take this away. Hello, everyone. My name is Wendy Hanamura. We're back again at the front end stage, and welcome to our live stream viewers all over the world. Thank you for sticking with us. We know there's as many people in the room and beyond that are watching and absorbing these great things. We are live streaming from